The economics of owning a giant supermarket chain. Hook. Imagine owning a business that can sell almost $150 billion of goods in a single year, operate thousands of locations, employ armies of people, run pharmacies, fuel centers, warehouses, and food plants, and still have so little margin for error that one bad capital decision can wipe billions off the result. That is the supermarket business at national scale. From the outside, a giant grocery chain looks simple. Customers walk in, they fill carts, they pay. The shelves refill. Repeat that across thousands of stores and it seems like a giant cash machine. But from the owner's seat, the business looks completely different. You are not really buying a collection of stores. You are buying a national operating system that must move enormous volumes of perishable and non-perishable products through warehouses, trucks, stores, pharmacies, and fuel centers, while balancing labor, food safety, pricing, supplier relationships, and capital spending. And the strangest part is this: the larger the chain becomes, the more powerful it can become, and the more expensive each mistake can become. So, what does it actually mean to own one of these companies? Where does the money come from? Where does it disappear? And why can a supermarket empire with more than $100 billion in annual sales still feel financially fragile? The answer begins with one change in perspective. Stop thinking about the supermarket as a building full of food. Think about it as the last visible node in a much larger machine. The customer sees an aisle. The owner sees demand forecasting, purchasing, inbound freight, warehousing, transportation, staffing, refrigeration, food safety, promotions, private label, pharmacies, fuel centers, and capital allocation. The customer sees a weekly grocery trip. The owner sees a network that has to work every day with almost no room for the individual pieces to fail independently. That is why this business is worth studying. It is one of the clearest examples of how huge revenue, huge infrastructure, and thin margins can exist at the same time. Start with scale. As of January 31, 2026, Kroger operated 2,697 supermarkets. 2,250 of those had pharmacies, and 1,731 had fuel centers. Albertsons, as of February 28, 2026, operated 2,244 stores, 1,713 in-store pharmacies, 405 fuel centers, 22 dedicated distribution centers, and 19 manufacturing facilities. That is the first thing a potential owner has to understand. A giant supermarket chain is not just retail real estate. It is retail plus logistics plus food handling plus manufacturing plus pharmacy operations plus, in many locations, fuel retailing. And all of those systems are connected. If a store does not receive the right products, the shelves are wrong. If a distribution center is inefficient, stores feel it. If staffing is weak, shelves may not be stocked, prepared food departments may slow down, and checkout lines can grow. If pricing is wrong, traffic can fall. If a food safety process fails, the consequences can extend beyond one department. At small scale, a problem can be local. At national scale, a process problem can repeat across hundreds or thousands of locations. Albertsons reported approximately 280,000 employees as of February 28, 2026. That number is useful because it shows what you are actually managing. Even before you think about suppliers, trucks, leases, maintenance, or technology, the company is already a massive labor organization. Now imagine the management problem. A national chain wants consistency. It wants stores to feel familiar, operations to follow standard procedures, and products to arrive through predictable systems. But each store exists in a different local market. One location may serve a dense urban neighborhood. Another may sit in a suburban shopping center. Another may be in a smaller regional market. Customer behavior, local competition, and product demand can differ, so the owner is constantly balancing two ideas that pull in opposite directions. Standardize enough to gain scale, localize enough to remain relevant. That tension exists everywhere in the business. Procurement wants scale. Store operations need local flexibility. Distribution wants efficiency. Individual stores need responsiveness. Corporate finance wants capital discipline. Local managers want the resources required to keep the store running well. That is why the phrase, owning a supermarket chain, can be misleading. You are not simply owning inventory and checkout lanes. You are owning a coordination problem. And the bigger the company becomes, the more valuable coordination becomes. So if you imagine buying a supermarket chain, do not imagine buying a store and multiplying it by 2,000. Imagine buying a machine with thousands of endpoints. Every endpoint has customers, inventory, refrigeration, labor, compliance, and local competition. Behind those endpoints sit distribution centers, manufacturing facilities, and a management structure trying to make the entire network behave consistently. If the machine works, scale becomes a competitive advantage. If the machine stops coordinating well, scale can turn into cost. And once you see the business that way, the next number becomes much more interesting. Because the revenue can be enormous, while the financial cushion underneath it can be surprisingly small. Kroger reported fiscal 2025 sales of $147.642 billion. That is the kind of revenue number that makes a business look almost impossible to hurt. But revenue is not profit. Kroger reported a gross margin of 22.9% in fiscal 2025. That means most of the sales dollar is already gone before you even reach the later operating expenses that sit below gross profit. And the difference between gross margin and operating profit is where the economics become much more revealing. Kroger reported fiscal 2025 operating profit of $1.9 billion, equal to 1.28% of sales. That result included $2.5 billion of fulfillment network impairment and related charges, so the figure cannot be treated as a clean picture of normalized operations. But it is still an excellent illustration of the core risk in a low-margin, capital-intensive network. A business can process almost $150 billion of annual sales and still have individual strategic decisions matter at the billion-dollar level. That is the owner's problem. When margins are thin, scale magnifies tiny changes. A 1 percentage point change on $100 billion of sales is $1 billion. That does not mean 1 percentage point is easy to gain or lose. It means the scale turns small operating differences into enormous absolute numbers. This is the supermarket owner's mental model. You stop asking whether a cost looks small in percentage terms. You ask what that percentage becomes when multiplied across the network. A small improvement repeated across billions of dollars in sales can be extremely valuable. A small deterioration can be extremely expensive. That is why low-margin businesses often become obsessed with details that outsiders ignore. A retailer cannot assume that enormous sales will rescue weak execution. The opposite can happen. Enormous sales can make weak execution more expensive because the weak process is repeated so many times. Think about pricing. A customer sees whether a product is a few cents cheaper or more expensive than somewhere else. The owner sees that pricing decision repeated across thousands of products and thousands of stores. Think about labor. 1 extra hour of staffing at one store sounds small. Repeated across thousands of stores and many days, the economics become much larger. Think about logistics. 1 inefficient movement does not matter much. A network built around inefficient movements can matter enormously. So when a grocery executive talks about fractions of a percentage point, those fractions can represent major sums of money. This is why the owner cannot focus only on sales growth. Higher sales are useful only if the chain can move those sales through the network efficiently enough to preserve economics after merchandise costs, logistics, labor, maintenance, and other operating demands. And this is also why grocery competition can become uncomfortable. The customer sees the final shelf price. The owner sees the entire system that must fit underneath that price. If you raise prices too aggressively, you risk damaging customer traffic and price perception. If you cut too aggressively, you can sacrifice margin. If you overspend on a new logistics model, the capital consequences can be enormous. If you underinvest, service can degrade. A giant supermarket chain therefore lives in a narrow corridor. It needs huge volume, but volume alone does not guarantee attractive economics. The business is about controlling the gap between what the customer pays and everything required to put the right product in front of that customer. To understand why that gap is so difficult to protect, follow the money backward from the shelf. A customer sees a box, a bottle, a bag of produce, or a package of meat with a price attached. The owner sees a cost chain. Kroger describes merchandise costs as including product costs, advertising, inbound freight, warehousing, transportation, and food production costs. That list tells you something important. The economics of the item begin long before it reaches the shelf. You need to buy or produce the product. You need to move it into the network. You need to store it. You need to move it again. You need to place it in the right store. You need to sell it before the economics are damaged by waste, poor availability, or bad execution. For a national chain, small inefficiencies multiply. A little extra transportation cost repeated across a huge network matters. A little extra handling matters. A little extra advertising spend matters. A little extra waste matters. And the chain cannot simply optimize one line item in isolation. That is one of the most important ideas in physical retail. Every optimization creates a trade-off somewhere else. Reduce inventory too aggressively, and product availability can suffer. Carry too much inventory, and you tie up more capital and increase exposure to spoilage and markdowns in perishable categories. Push more work into distribution centers, and stores may become simpler, but warehouses may become more complex. Push more work into stores, and the distribution network may become simpler, but store labor becomes more complicated. Centralize decisions, and you can gain consistency. Centralize too much, and local stores may lose flexibility. The owner, therefore, cannot manage the supermarket by looking at one cost line and asking how to minimize it. The real question is how to minimize total system cost while preserving sales, availability, and customer experience. That is a much harder problem. And physical grocery adds another complication. Products are not economically identical. A shelf-stable packaged product can tolerate time differently from fresh produce, meat, or prepared food. A product with a long, usable life gives the system more flexibility. A time-sensitive product creates pressure. The network has less room for delay, over-ordering, or bad forecasting. That does not require an exact spoilage percentage to understand. It is simply the operational reality of moving food. The owner must therefore think about velocity. How quickly does a category move? How much buffer is needed? How much complexity does the assortment create? How much physical handling does the product require before the customer buys it? Those questions are not visible on the shelf label, but they shape the economics underneath it. This is what makes grocery so different from a business that sells one standardized digital product. Physical goods must physically move, and a meaningful share of those goods are temperature-sensitive or time-sensitive. The owner, therefore, has to think about unit economics as a chain of linked decisions rather than one simple markup. The shelf price is the visible number. Behind it sits a hidden sequence of costs and operational choices. That sequence leads to the most important physical infrastructure in the business outside the stores themselves: distribution. Albertsons reported 22 dedicated distribution centers and 19 manufacturing facilities as of February 28, 2026. That is not decorative infrastructure. It is the mechanism that allows thousands of stores to function as one company instead of thousands of separate buying operations. At national scale, the distribution system has to answer a basic question every day. What should be where and when? That sounds simple until you multiply it across thousands of stores and enormous product catalogs. A supermarket cannot just receive one generic truckload and put it everywhere. Different stores have different demand patterns. Different categories move at different speeds. Refrigerated and frozen products have different handling requirements from shelf-stable goods. Promotions can change demand quickly. Holidays can change demand quickly. Weather can change demand quickly. The distribution network sits between those moving patterns and the customer. From the owner's perspective, the network has two jobs that can conflict. First, it has to be efficient. Trucks, warehouses, and production assets need enough volume to justify their cost. Second, it has to be responsive. Stores need the right products at the right time. This is where scale begins to create network economics. If stores are spread too thinly across a region, the company may have less density supporting the distribution system. If the stores are dense enough, the same infrastructure can serve a larger revenue base more effectively. But more density is useful only if the system is designed well. A warehouse is not automatically valuable because it is large. It is valuable because it helps move the right inventory through the network efficiently. A truck fleet is not automatically valuable because there are many trucks. It is valuable because routes, timing, and store demand line up well enough for the system to work. This is the owner's challenge with infrastructure. Physical assets are expensive commitments. Once you build or commit to a major system, you cannot change direction as easily as you can change a marketing slogan. And that is why capital decisions in logistics matter so much. The Kroger fiscal 2025 result is a reminder of that. The company reported $2.5 billion of fulfillment network impairment and related charges during the year. Again, that does not mean fulfillment investment is inherently bad. It means that when a national retailer makes a strategic infrastructure bet, the accounting and economic consequences can be measured in billions. That is the scale we are dealing with. A small grocer can make a bad equipment purchase. A giant chain can make a bad network decision. And the difference between those two mistakes can be several orders of magnitude. The difficult part is that the owner cannot simply avoid investment. A national chain must maintain the system. It needs stores, distribution capacity, equipment, technology, and physical infrastructure that can support the flow of merchandise. So the real capital question is not whether to invest. It is where, when, and how much. Invest too early, and you may build capacity before the network needs it. Invest too late, and existing infrastructure may become a bottleneck. Build the wrong type of capacity, and the company can be stuck with an expensive system that does not match customer behavior. That is why the distribution network is more than a cost center. It is a strategic asset and a strategic risk at the same time. Once that network exists, the next question is what products you want flowing through it. And that is where private label becomes strategically interesting. Kroger reported more than $32 billion in sales from its Our Brands products in fiscal 2024. It also owned 33 food production plants that supplied about 31% of the Our Brands units sold. Those figures show that private label at this scale is not a small shelf experiment. It can be a business inside the business. For the owner, a private label product changes the relationship with the shelf. Instead of acting only as a retailer for someone else's brand, the chain can also control the consumer-facing brand itself, and in some cases, part of the production system behind it. That matters strategically because shelf space is one of the most valuable things the retailer controls. A national brand can be sold by many retailers. A store brand belongs to the retailer's own ecosystem. If customers like it, that product can become one reason to return to the chain rather than simply compare identical branded products across competitors. That gives the owner another lever beyond location and price. It creates assortment differentiation. It also creates another layer of data and decision-making around what the chain wants to sell under its own name. But it is important not to oversimplify the economics. Private label is not automatically free money. The research here does not support one universal margin premium, so we should not pretend there is one. Instead, the value is better understood in terms of control. The chain can decide how the product fits the assortment. It can create products customers cannot buy from a direct competitor under the same label. It can build more control over product positioning. And when the private label business becomes large enough, it can justify dedicated sourcing and production capabilities. But private label also adds responsibility. If you control more of the brand and production relationship, you also control more of the execution risk. Quality, consistency, sourcing, and brand trust become your problem. And because the product carries the retailer's own name or brand identity, a quality failure can affect more than one sale. It can affect trust in the chain's broader own brand program. This is a recurring theme in giant supermarket economics. Every additional layer of control can create leverage, but it also creates another operational system that must work. The stores must work. The distribution centers must work. The product strategy must work. And none of it works without people. Albertsons reported approximately 280,000 employees as of February 28, 2026. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported average hourly earnings of $22.38 in November 2025 for employees in supermarkets and other grocery retailers, excluding convenience retailers. Those two facts should not be multiplied together to create a simple payroll estimate. The employee count and wage statistic come from different contexts and do not by themselves tell you hours worked, job mix, or benefits. But together, they show the labor intensity of the industry. A giant grocery chain needs people in stores, distribution, manufacturing, management, and specialized operations. In-store labor is especially difficult because the business is not one repetitive task. You need checkout, stocking, receiving, produce, meat, bakery, prepared foods, customer service, management, pharmacy in many locations, fuel operations in some locations. And those labor needs change by time of day of week, season, and store. From the owner's perspective, labor becomes a balancing problem. Too much labor can pressure margins. Too little can damage execution. If shelves are not stocked, availability suffers. If lines are long, customer experience suffers. If fresh departments are understaffed, service and product quality can suffer. This is why labor productivity is not the same thing as simply using fewer people. The owner wants the right amount of labor in the right place at the right time. That is much harder than reducing a spreadsheet line. Imagine a store that cuts labor so aggressively that products sit in the back room instead of reaching the shelf. The accounting may show fewer labor hours, but the business may also lose sales because the product is unavailable to the customer. Or imagine a fresh department that is not staffed well enough to maintain presentation and service. The labor saving may create a customer problem. This is the basic supermarket trade-off. Operational costs are often tied directly to the quality of execution, and scale magnifies the result. A staffing decision that looks small at one location becomes a major financial and operational decision when repeated across thousands of stores. The same is true for training, scheduling, and management quality. A strong process repeated across thousands of stores can create enormous value. A weak process repeated across thousands of stores can create enormous friction. That is why a company with hundreds of thousands of employees cannot treat culture and operating discipline as soft topics. They are economic topics. If the company cannot translate a corporate process into consistent store-level execution, the scale advantage starts to weaken. Which brings us to another complication. A national chain may look standardized to the customer, but regulation is not perfectly standardized underneath it. The Food and Drug Administration provides a model food code that jurisdictions can use when developing or updating retail food safety rules. But the FDA Food Code is not one single nationwide retail food code directly governing every grocery store in exactly the same way. More than 3,000 state, local, and tribal agencies have primary responsibility for regulating retail food and food service industries in the United States, while the FDA supports them with the Model Food Code and technical resources. For a local operator, one regulatory environment can already be complex. For a giant chain, the compliance challenge is multiplied across jurisdictions. The company wants standardized processes because standardization is efficient. But it also has to respect local and state requirements where they differ. That means the owner is not simply running one rule book across 2,000 stores. The organization needs systems that can create consistency while still adapting to jurisdictional differences. That affects how procedures are written, how employees are trained, and how compliance information flows through the company. At national scale, the owner cannot rely on memory or informal practices. The company needs processes that survive employee turnover, management changes, and local differences. That is an important economic point because compliance creates overhead. But it can also reward scale. A giant chain can build centralized compliance teams, training systems, and documentation processes that spread across a massive revenue base. A smaller operator may face many of the same categories of responsibility without the same scale over which to spread those systems. This does not mean bigger automatically means safer or better. It means scale changes the economics of building the compliance infrastructure. And food safety is only one part of the broader regulatory environment surrounding a giant supermarket chain. The research here is deliberately focused on verified retail food claims rather than inventing a giant list of rules. The important point is simpler. Regulation is not separate from operations. It has to be embedded in the operating system. You cannot treat it as an occasional administrative task. If the chain is national, the compliance function is national too, even when rules are enforced locally. That creates cost and complexity, but it also reveals one of the reasons scale can be valuable. And that leads directly to the central paradox of the supermarket empire. Scale is the entire reason this business can become powerful. A network of thousands of stores creates enormous purchasing volume. It can support distribution centers, manufacturing facilities, private label programs, pharmacies, and fuel operations. It can spread technology and management systems across a huge revenue base. But scale is also the reason mistakes become dangerous. Think about the two sides of the equation. On the advantage side, a large chain can coordinate procurement across thousands of locations. It can move private label products through a huge distribution network. It can use manufacturing capacity to support parts of its own brand portfolio. It can centralize many decisions that would otherwise be duplicated store by store. It can also learn at scale. If a process works well, the company can potentially apply that learning across many locations. If a merchandising idea improves execution, it can be rolled through a large network. If a training system improves consistency, the benefit can extend far beyond one store. That is one of the hidden strengths of scale. The network becomes a platform for repeating good decisions. But on the risk side, the exact same mechanism can repeat bad decisions. Labor problems multiply. Refrigeration problems multiply. Maintenance problems multiply. Compliance problems multiply. A weak technology decision can affect the network. A weak capital decision can affect billions of dollars of assets or expenses. This is why the owner should not ask only, "How big can we get?" The better question is, what does additional scale actually improve? If adding scale improves purchasing, density, product control, and fixed cost efficiency, it can strengthen the system. If it simply adds more complexity faster than the organization can absorb it, the opposite can happen. There is also a management limit hidden inside every scale story. More stores create more revenue, but they also create more decisions, more exceptions, and more places where execution can drift. So the value of scale depends partly on whether the company's systems become stronger as the network grows. If processes, data, logistics, and management quality do not keep up with growth, scale can become a burden. The Kroger and Albertsons footprints make this visible. Thousands of stores are supported by pharmacies, fuel centers, distribution centers, and manufacturing assets. Those systems create capabilities a small grocer cannot easily copy. But each system also needs capital, labor, and management attention. A giant supermarket chain is therefore not a simple scale business where bigger automatically means better. It is a coordination business. The company wins when the pieces reinforce each other. Stores create volume. Volume supports distribution. Distribution supports availability. Private label can strengthen differentiation and product control. Scale can support centralized systems. But if one major piece is wrong, the same scale that created the advantage can amplify the damage. That is why the final job of the owner is not really retailing. It is capital allocation. At the smallest scale, a grocer can think in terms of one location: rent, staffing, inventory, traffic, and pricing. At national scale, the owner has to decide where enormous amounts of capital and management attention should go across an interconnected network. Should money go into new stores, remodels, distribution capacity, manufacturing, technology, digital fulfillment, maintenance, pricing, investment? Those decisions cannot be answered from one universal formula. But the financial structure tells you what is at stake. Kroger reported $147.642 billion in fiscal 2025 sales and a 22.9% gross margin. It also reported $1.9 billion of operating profit, equal to 1.28% of sales, in a year that included $2.5 billion of fulfillment network impairment and related charges. The point is not that one year defines supermarket economics forever. The point is that when a business has thin operating economics and huge capital commitments, strategic mistakes matter disproportionately. The owner is constantly deciding where to accept cost today for a better system tomorrow. Build too little infrastructure and the network may struggle. Build the wrong infrastructure and you may own expensive capacity that does not produce the expected return. Staff too lightly and execution may suffer. Staff too heavily and labor can pressure the economics. Push price too far and customers may notice. Hold price too low without offsetting efficiencies and margin can suffer. Expand private label and you can gain more control, but you also take on more product responsibility. That means the owner's real job is deciding which problems deserve capital and which problems should be solved operationally. Not every issue should be fixed by building something new. Not every cost should be reduced simply because it is large. Not every growth opportunity should be pursued simply because the company can finance it. The owner has to ask what each decision does to the whole system. Will it improve store productivity? Will it improve distribution? Will it strengthen product control? Will it reduce complexity or add complexity? Will it make the network more resilient or create another fixed commitment? Those are capital allocation questions, but they are also operating questions. And that is why the supermarket business is so revealing as an ownership story. The revenue is visible. The shelves are visible. The stores are visible. The real business is mostly invisible. It is the network underneath everything the customer sees. A customer may spend only a few minutes deciding between two products. The company may have spent years building the systems that put those products on the shelf at that moment. The owner's challenge is to make that invisible system efficient enough that the visible retail experience remains competitive. Final payoff. The paradox of a giant supermarket chain is that scale gives you extraordinary reach, purchasing volume, and infrastructure. But it also gives you thousands of places where a small mistake can compound. The business is not won by discovering one giant margin hidden somewhere in the store. It is won by making procurement, logistics, labor, product strategy, compliance, and capital allocation work together every day. That is why a company can move more than $100 billion of merchandise through its system and still obsess over tiny changes in economics. At this scale, tiny changes are not tiny. 1 percentage point on $100 billion of sales is more than $1 billion. And that is the real economics of owning a supermarket empire. You are not really buying shelves. You are buying a machine. The stores are simply where the customer gets to see it working, and the entire value of the business depends on whether thousands of invisible decisions underneath those stores keep working together.